Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Story Hour. I am your host, Daniel Marcus. My fabulous co-host is Laura Blackwell, and I hope that you're all healthy, safe, taking care of yourselves, taking care of your loved ones. It's a good time to be doing that. It's always a good time to be doing that. So I started Story Hour, but just right in the early throes of COVID lockdown, with the intention of just getting some writing friends and me together and sharing our work with each other and just building a little bit of virtual community in what were kind of weird, scary, SF-nal times, and it has just grown so far beyond that. It almost beggars belief. We've been going over 3 years now, week in, week out, with the exception of the week between Christmas and New Year's. Myself and my just unbelievably fabulous co-host, Laura Blackwell. And the way this works is really simple. I like to think of it as one of the oldest forms of human entertainment, which is people sitting around the fire telling lies to each other. So every week, we've got two authors doing exactly that. And we've been really blessed in that we've got new writers, we've got established writers, we've got the enormous tent of speculative fiction, pretty much every corner, from fantasy to space opera to slipstream and everything in between. It's just been really, really a privilege. And tonight, we're really happy to have Julian K. Jarboe and Alexander Danner. I'm also really happy to announce that we have received a CEFWA Givers Grant for 2023, so that we can keep the lights on and these virtual rooms open, and that we can continue to bring you the best, what we like to think of as the best in spoken word speculative fiction you can get anywhere. And I'm really happy to not have to keep paying for this out of pocket. So it is our custom to ask authors to indicate a worthy cause for us to call your attention to. If you're fortunate enough to help to do that, but just be aware, spread the awareness. So tonight, Julian is reading tonight from the Navajo Water Project. That's NavajoWaterProject.org. The Navajo Water Project is a community-managed utility alternative that brings hot and cold running water to homes without access to water or sewer lines. And they do this primarily by installing their off-grid home water systems. But their impact spreads beyond just those installations. They're also investing in more effective septic systems, skilled job creation, and even giving individuals grants so that they can step up to solve their own water challenges via what they call the Water is Life Fund. So that's NavajoWaterProject.org. Alexander is reading tonight for the National Center for Transgender Equality. That's transequality.org. NCTE was founded 20 years ago, in 2003, by transgender activists who recognized the urgent need for policy change to advance transgender equality. There's a committed BOD, board of directors, there's a volunteer staff of 1, donated office space, and their intention is to accomplish what no one had yet done, which is to provide a powerful transgender advocacy presence in Washington, D.C. That was 20 years ago, how they got started. Today, they are a team of hardworking staff members supported by a nationwide community of transgender people, allies, and advocates with an extensive record of winning life-saving change for transgender people. So that's transequality.org. Please check out both of these worthy causes. And again, if you can contribute, great. If you can't, that's cool. Just be aware, spread the awareness if you have the opportunity. We are going to start tonight with Alexander Danner. Alexander is the co-creator of the serial audio drama podcast Greater Boston, www.greaterbostonshow.com. And he is a scriptwriter for the official audio drama adaptation of the classic indie comic series ElfQuest. Awesome, by Wendy and Richard Pinney. He is also sound designer for the audio drama What's the Frequency, WTFrequency.com, and a contributing sound designer to Unwell, a Midwestern Gothic mystery, and the Amelia Project. His fiction has appeared most recently in the themed anthology Museum Piece. And Alexander teaches at Emerson College. And he is a returning speaker, a repeat offender here at Story Hour. So Alexander, the floor is yours. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be back here. I had such a lovely time last time. And I'm excited to be here again and with my friend Julian. Always a pleasure. Um, okay, I will jump right in. I am reading two very short pieces tonight. I am going to start with the lighter of the two. And this is The Woman Who Could Smell the Future. The woman who could smell the future understood that she was a joke. A bland pun, too weak to merit a groan. A mishap of science with slightly less merit than silly putty. If she were in a comic book, she'd be a fourth-rate guest star for a third-rate hero, the sort of heroine who gets killed off in some crass multi-part crossover to generate a little bit of cheap shock and posthumous buzz. But she wasn't a comic book heroine, not even a fourth-rate one. She was just a girl with a name, Jordan, and a job, copywriter, and a boyfriend, Mark, and a very small temporal distortion permanently lodged in her left nostril. It wasn't especially useful. She certainly hadn't figured out any way to make money from it. You can't smell lottery numbers or prime stocks. Her power didn't give her any athletic or artistic talent. You can't literally sniff out crime, no matter what the popular metaphors may tell you. In fact, here's a comprehensive list of the uses Jordan had found for her talent. 1. She always had an umbrella when she needed one. 2. She knew when her friends were planning surprise parties for her. She could smell the candles. 3. She deftly avoided other people's flatulence. Not much satisfaction there, as she'd have already encountered the odor hours earlier. And 4, she knew when buildings were going to catch fire. This last, of course, seems pretty useful. And it was. Over the course of her life, she had doused dozens of fires before they could threaten lives or property. She had even considered becoming a professional firefighter. But fire departments don't want people who can predict fires. People who predict fires are usually able to do that only because they set the fires in the first place. After the third time she was investigated for arson, Jordan pretty much gave up trying to warn anyone about fires at all. Instead, she just bought herself a good fire extinguisher, showed up where she was needed, and slipped away before anyone could ask any questions. This had required her to learn a bit of lockpicking as well, but fortunately Jordan was good with her hands. She played a little piano too. So, those are the pertinent details that led up to Jordan's present situation, hiding in an empty room across from the office of a magazine editor long after business hours, hoping to prevent a murder. Yes, she actually sniffed out crime for once. Even she rolled her eyes at that realization. The editor's name was Elliot Clark, and Jordan had been in his office 12 hours earlier interviewing for a freelance gig with the publishing house's new magazine on container gardening. It was dull work, but Jordan had an opening in her schedule and was really hoping to put money aside for a trip to Wisconsin. She'd always enjoyed both cold weather and cheese, so Wisconsin seemed something of a Shangri-La to her. The interview was proceeding well. Jordan was personable and well qualified, so she had a better than fair chance at the job. Halfway through the interview, though, Jordan became distracted by an unmistakable odor. The acrid tang of gunpowder hung about the room roughly 12 hours hence. She recognized the odor immediately. She had been shot once herself, when she broke into a paper warehouse to put out a fire started by a faulty coffee pot. The night watchman naturally felt awful once he found out that the intruder he'd shot had actually saved the warehouse. But then he was fired and he didn't worry so much about Jordan after that. Jordan was fortunate in that instance. The shot had only grazed her arm, and the paper company had been only too happy to cover her medical expenses, in light of the major catastrophe she had averted. Still, it had been among the most frightening experiences of her life, and the associated scent had stayed with her ever since. So now here she was, hiding in a conference room, spying on her potential future employer, whom she still hoped was going to hire her to write 3,000 words about stupid little potted herbs. For the moment, Clark was alone, which suggested the possibility of suicide rather than murder, but he didn't look much like he was planning to kill himself. He was working at his computer, plugged into an iPod, bopping his head to whatever he was listening to. He was obviously under deadline pressure, or he wouldn't have been at the office so late at night, but he didn't much seem to mind being there either. Sure enough, after several minutes, another figure appeared. A woman in her mid-30s wearing a decidedly peeved expression and carrying, surprise, a modest handgun. At least now Jordan knew who was planning to shoot whom. That question had given her some worry. It would be humiliating to come to the aid of the wrong person, only to make the killer's work that much easier. And so, with all pertinent mysteries resolved, it was officially time for the ridiculous part. She sighed heavily and hefted her fire extinguisher. She had no real weapons, so she just decided to stick with the equipment she already knew, and quietly waited for the woman to turn her back. She didn't have to wait long. The woman was quite direct about her task, heading straight to Clark's door and raising the gun. A short blast from the fire extinguisher was enough to distract her. As the woman began to turn, Jordan brought the extinguisher down on her head, hard enough to knock her out, though she hoped not hard enough to cause any permanent damage. The gun discharged once, as she had known it would have to, but the bullet passed harmlessly through a wall and into the empty office next door, where it lodged in the side of another editor's desk. Jordan kicked the gun away from the woman, across the hall and into the conference room where she'd been hiding herself. Clark, finally on his feet by this point, was looking back and forth between Jordan and the shooter with some distress. Do I know you? He asked. No, said Jordan, before making her exit. Back home, she deposited her shoes, coat, and fire extinguisher in the coat closet, as she did every evening. It was late, and Mark had already eaten. Now he was relaxing with a glass of beer, something dark and malty that he had brewed himself. The basement was perpetually cluttered with bottles and vats of his ongoing projects. Only she had such a practical skill. How was the interview? He asked, putting the beer down on the coffee table. Jordan sighed as she dropped down beside him on the couch. It went fine at first, but the guy seemed pretty distracted by the end. Honestly, I'm not sure he'll even be that focused on filling the position. I'm sorry, Mark said, winding his arms around her from the side as he placed his chin on her shoulder. But it didn't really sound like an assignment you'd have enjoyed anyway. You can do better. Maybe, she said. I'd like to. She sniffed, not really meaning to spy on the future, but there it was anyway. Blueberries. Blueberry pancakes, several hours away. Breakfast. And a few days after that, dirt? Dirt and basil. Oregano. I don't know, she said. Maybe it went better than I thought. After a moment, she stood and stretched. Anyway, I think I'm going to turn in early. And she left Mark to his beer. She wasn't long in falling asleep, and in her sleep she dreamed that she could do better, that she was better. In her dream, she could outrun bullets or snatch them from the air. In her dream, Wisconsin was within her grasp anytime she wanted it. In her dream, she could fly. Okay, that's that one. Thank you. Okay. My second one is going a bit heavier. Actually, start at the first page instead of the last. This one is called The Fathers of Dead Children. Okay. Images of the dead are a form of gravity. We are pulled inexorably into orbit, spiraling down along the curves of space, clicking next, and then next, and then next. T minus 6 months, and the boy slaps one hand into a cake shaped like a rocket. Our orbit degrades. The well of gravitation drags us down. T minus 2 weeks, and the boy dances naked through a sprinkler. We burn in his atmosphere. T minus 12 hours, and the boy is in his father's arms, each grinning like he's won the world. The longer we look, the more the boy collapses in on himself, the more inescapable he becomes. He is a black hole. We never knew him, never will know him. We'll only ever know his crushing force. And because we can't resist the photographs, inevitably the fathers of dead children come. They don't come for the dead boy's father, of course. He is one among a He is now one among a plurality of solitude, a fraternity of nuclear shadows. In joining them, he is cut free to sink wholly into the singularity of his son. No, the fathers of dead children come for us, the ones still in orbit, still clinging desperately to our own tiny satellites. We hear them before we see them. The father's molecules emit a deep gut-tumbling thrum that hovers on the brink of nausea, vibrating at the frequency of unspoken recrimination. For themselves, for their wives and lovers, the mothers of their dead children, for the children themselves, for you. Resonance is achieved. Our bellies turn over as our bodies hum in response. We stand from whatever we've been doing, leave our families at dinner or in front of the television or in cars by the side of the road, and coalesce in the streets. We accuse each other. We bury our guilt. We wait to meet the fathers. They step out from newspapers and televisions, step from the whispers of our neighbors' voices. They shiver in the streets with their naked hands thrust into their pockets, grimace grinning to prove how they aren't cold or sad or broken. They've only forgotten their jackets, just like we have. We initiate the masculine rituals of condolence. A sharp punch in the arm, each of us in turn, or brutish hugs, palms slapped mercilessly against the back, warming one shoulder at a time, distributing cancer-black bruises, our only ward against grief. Buck up, pal, we say. Buck up. They are in a better place now, we say, because it is better to lie beneath dirt than in the arms of your father. Time heals all wounds, we say, because we are each of us a salamander, and children are our tales. The fathers of dead children smile at us. You know the smile. The one that turns eyes into wrong-ended magnets, the polarities repulsing, contact impossible. Their gaze pushes ours to the ground. The force bends our backs. We apologize. or express our condolences, the distinction too fine to discern with only our human eyes. It's okay, the fathers say. It's not your fault. There was nothing you could have done. We don't even know you. They grant absolution with a one-handed squeeze of the shoulder. Buck up, pal, they say. Buck up. But they give us no bruises. They return with us to our lives. In the bars, they drunkenly brandish their fists at the empty stools beside us. You'll never know, they howl, and we welcome their admonitions as prophecy. In our homes, they pull all the drawings from the refrigerator, hide them in the crisper underneath the softening tomatoes. They snap every crayon in two. They flick carrots from our dinner plates, sending them one by one to shrivel beneath the television. They hide themselves away to sleep. Each father seeks his own private burrow, wriggling into any fissure small enough to hold him. In the microwave oven, curled around a bowl of noodles. In a sock drawer, only the tip of a nose protruding from between the argyles. We pretend not to see them. We ignore the bulges beneath the rugs, the toes poking out from behind the couch. We let them rest. We leave casseroles on the table and congratulate ourselves if we find only crumbs in the morning. They rise from sleep long before us, escaping into the haze of dawn. Or else they stay cocooned long after, only emerging after we have risen and dressed and eaten our meals and left them to stew in their noontime torpor. Or they rise automatically and wander out into the world without bothering to wake at all. We find their discarded skins. Like reptiles, they molt in the night, sheaths of photographs peeling from their bodies. Some of them visit our children. These are the brave ones, the ones whose hearts still beat, whose blood still flows. Atrium, ventricle, lungs. Pause for oxygenation, so easy to forget. Atrium, ventricle, body. And so they can bear to see the tiny faces and tiny hands that drive others of their kind into cupboards and crawl spaces. They watch the children, come near to them. Some even speak. The father whose daughter fell from a window teaches young artists the mathematics of perspective, horizon lines, vanishing points. The father whose daughter ate peanuts turns up in the school cafeteria, declares it pizza day even though it's not Friday. No flash frozen rectangles for these students. He rolls the dough by hand, shreds the cheese by hand. The sauce simmers 3 hours before it touches the crust. His secret ingredient is cinnamon. The father whose sons died on the highway appears at the library, gathers the children, and changes all the songs. The wheels on the bus go all the way from Portland to Portland and straight on to London, Moscow, Tokyo. A full load of children cross the sea, round and round, round and round, round and round. They come home that night with their pockets stuffed with exotic candies, the wrappers printed in languages none of us can read. Such extraordinary men, such gifts to impart. The fathers of the living are humbled. We are boorish creatures, dull-witted and neglectful, aloof and asinine. We poison our children with our every absent-minded gesture, every distracted glance. How could we not? After the fathers of the dead pack up their pencils and books and spices, our children return home to our weary arms, our mumbled stories, our leftover casseroles. We fill them up with frozen waffles and television, then push them off to their beds and are buoyed by the gift of their absence. That night, the fathers of the living gather in all the backyards. We leave our families in their houses, with the doors closed, the windows sealed tight. We wade through the photographs left in the wake of the father's passing, the sea of children's faces that wash across our lawns into the gutters. We take up rakes, gather all those faces into piles, great hills of anonymous memories. One by one, we each strike a single match and set fire to our vicarious grief, release a perfect toxic belch into the air. We breathe deeply, chastened and gratified by the damage done. Atrium, ventricle, lungs. Pause. The fathers of dead children fall back like a tide released from the moon's tether, not truly gone, only obscured by the horizon. Our molecules disentangle. Our vibrations subside. The fathers of the living find ourselves alone again among our children and the mothers of our children. Somehow, the children still orbit our quieted bodies, spinning ellipses in space around us. We are afraid to touch them. We are desperate to touch them. That's all. Thank you.
Wow. As is our custom, we're going to pause for a moment between authors. But before we do, man, Alexander, I love both stories, but the last one just floored me, man. As
Thank
parents,
you.
our hearts are walking around outside our bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all right, let's just chill for a moment. Let both of those wonderful stories ring and resonate. Oh, man. Alexander Danner, everyone. Thank you so much, Alexander.
Thank you.
Our next author, Julian K. Jarboe, is the author of the Lambda Award-winning collection, Everyone on the Moon is Essential Personnel. They live in Salem, Massachusetts. Julian, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Alexander for requesting that I join him on this event. And thank you to Laura and Daniel for reaching out to me. I have one piece. I don't really know what's going on with it tonally. I wrote it last year and I still don't know if it's happy or sad. So maybe you guys can tell me.
Those are the best kinds sometimes.
Yeah, and it's very online with a capital O. So there's that. Ooh, sorry. You may hear some sounds in the background. That is my dog snoring, and it cannot be helped. But this story takes place in the near future. It is called. Thanks, Ben. It is called The Only Innocent Man. On the Friday before April break, Charlie discovered his new worst fear. He had an acute anxiety bordering on panic that one of his students would track down his personal website from his own teenage years, what used to be called a blog before social media was social media, years that were now actual complete decades ago, and identify Charlie as the site's creator. Zeke delivered this fresh life-derailing terror in the last 5 minutes of their one-on-one tutoring block. Zeke had been suspiciously productive on his lab report and uncharacteristically alert, motivated to clear all obstacles to his still hidden agenda. There's something, Zeke said, and took a moment or two to collect himself, drawing a long breath and exhaling through his nose. He seemed even more fragile than usual, like he might be startled out of his chair by any sudden movement. Still, Charlie was proud of Zeke and the work they had done together. The kid had come a long way from his constant, instantaneous meltdowns. Okay, Zeke announced at last. Okay? Okay, I'm okay. You are, yes. Also, there is something. Yeah? What is it? I'm listening. Okay, here's something. I like your stories, Mr. Bravo. That's the thing. Thank you, Zeke. Teaching had given Charlie a habit of using people's names more often than necessary. I'm glad to hear it. Was there an example in class that connected some dots for you? Charlie smiled stupidly, a naive fool, unaware that he was about to lose all first-hand experience of peace, though he would later revise that self-narrative, redacting stupidly in favor of ignorantly. He was trying to remove value-laden words like stupid from his vocabulary. Smart, too. Smartness was a construct of private property only possessible through scarcity. Property was a thorny issue for him. It was best to leave all of that behind if possible. No, your old ones, Zeke said, almost whispering. His giant eyes went glassy, and there was something in his posture, too, and the flushless paste of his acne-stricken skin, his complexion like that of a wax figure about to liquefy. Oh, yeah, which ones are those? Charlie had forgotten just this once. Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. And Zeke described, in alarming detail, the soft-core romance stories which Charlie once wrote on commission for strangers on the internet. Back then, Charlie had developed a formula based on feedback from his clientele, who were, from what he could discern, mostly other trans boys and men, more closeted ones who were navigating rhetorical traps such as, what does it mean? That they were afraid of cis men, yet attracted to cis men, and wanted to be a man among men romantically. What it meant was that they were gay men, but try telling that to anyone who has already drunk deeply of the same swill of gender essentialism that we're all bathed in and told to take it for primordial lifeblood. Someone has to be a victim and someone else their oppressor. Someone has to be innocent and someone has to be guilty. But in the meantime, Charlie got himself a little spending money out of these tensions. He made enough to afford groceries and the odd slice of fun for a while before he decided to become an educator and deleted, or so he believed, his entire online presence. Charlie's formula went as such. The narrator explained his situation in the tradition of an advice column letter. He was a cis man who had discovered himself falling suddenly, bashfully, and chastely in love with a trans man, usually following a particular stereotyped social or biomedical turning point in transition, such as having come out yesterday or developing a perfect beard overnight. The social transition was always hard but undeterred. The biomedical transition was always remarkably rapid and uncomplicated. There were no idiosyncratic details to either man's personality. Nothing that would make them feel like a specific person who might actually exist. Both men were no older than 29. The cis man was always at least a year older. Neither party was actively hooking up with anyone else. The cis man and the trans man were sometimes childhood friends, sometimes college roommates. One time, Charlie had been asked to put them in an arranged marriage. That one had been very popular. Sometimes there was a marriage plot motivated by immigration or health insurance. Sometimes we're getting bombed. That one had been very popular. Sometimes there was a marriage plot motivated by immigration or health insurance. Sometimes the men were coworkers on a business trip and there was only one bed in the hotel room. One way or another, these two were forced in proximity and stuck there. They must never, at first, actively choose to be together. I just want to pause here and point out that being Zoom bombed by basically like gay porn in the middle of this story is only enhancing it. Anyway, story continued. The trans man had no intra-community drama or didn't seem to know any other trans people, which he was somehow fine with if he noticed at all. He shouldn't. There were no unending toils with care providers, no unflattering habits, no substance abuse, no emergent libidinal changes. There were hardly any sexual concerns at all, beyond the novelty of the cis protagonist developing a crush on a person he simply hadn't considered before. His attraction was a surprise, but it never scared or repulsed him. Homophobia and transphobia existed vaguely, or in the past tense. In the end, the fictional cis man only wanted to know how to tell his trans man love interest how he felt. Charlie's signature detail was the haircut. At some point in every commissioned story, the cis man would give the trans man a haircut, or take him to a men's barber, or give him permission to cut his hair, or run a hand along his new fade. A haircut was always involved. It had started as an individual client's request and proved so popular that Charlie eventually advertised it as a core feature of his work. He never fully understood why the hair thing was so important and potent. Maybe as a stand-in for sex? An act of intimate, bodily, masculine mentorship and solidarity without all that icky, AIDSy fluid exchange. Whatever the reason, it brought him massive success within his little niche. In retrospect, it was foolish to think deleting the website could undo its outsized impact. Several of his commissions went viral, mistaken for the genuine article, and had circulated across the internet of yore with Trekley commentary. The tales were just so wholesome. These dudes might have held some social or physical power to harm, but as they were dudes, gross, but all they did was yuck and guffaw. They might have been, the bad gender, but they weren't oppressing anyone here, no siree. They exhibited themselves for voyeuristic gratification, which was basically a feminist act. The stories reassured their patrons, yes, you can want all this and still be good. These fake, tender bros might be you-know-what British slang for cigarettes, but they, alone among their kind, were blameless. After Zeke stammered through an excruciatingly thorough description of the formula's generalities, Charlie thought through his response carefully. Was this an overture of stalking, or blackmail, or both? What makes you think I wrote things like that, Zeke? Zeke struggled to explain, but eventually described a central feature of the website. There at the top of the page, any given page, were teenage Charlie's core political identities he had once assembled and published, presented as his About Me page. Something like a taxonomy of his gender, sexuality, cognitive and physical disabilities, race, ethnicity, religious beliefs, regional dialect of spoken English, socioeconomic class of origin, socioeconomic class of aspiration, degree of introversion and extroversion, Myers-Briggs type, enneagram number, astrological sign, serostatus for both HIV and for some reason Lyme disease, favorite color, most humiliating childhood memory, and how he preferred his coffee and tea. Thankfully, he stopped short of including his mother's maiden name, the street he grew up on, and the name of his first pet. This sort of hyper-disclosed and itemized microbiography was all the rage at the time. People would pick fights if you didn't offer up where and how you compared with them along every imaginable axis. He really didn't know yet, as a youngster, how to discern what was secret from what was private. Charlie stalled. He had completely misunderstood and underestimated his student. Journeying this deep into ancient cyberspace was equal parts impressive and unnerving. Okay, Zeke, suppose you're right. Let's say you got me. Then I would have to ask you, and this is very serious now, how did you find all of that? Zeke struggled to answer Charlie's question. Blisters of moisture beaded all over the boy's body, detectably nervous sweat, wells of proto-tears, the gurgle of mucus rising in the nose and the throat, a gelatinous state all around, just jelly boy. It found me, Zeke mumbled, in a vision. A vision, Zeke? Where did you have a vision? I had it. Zeke practiced his breathing again and spoke out loud and clear. In the computer lab. If something like this were going to happen, it should have been from one of the nosier and more online kids. Zeke was a drooping dandelion of a boy creature whose parents may or may not have been in a cult and absolutely did not permit things like technology or shampoo in their home. Strive Academy's slogan was "Today's Misfits, Tomorrow's Mavericks." It was a micro charter which boasted, quote, bespoke learning for young minds who have been unable to find success in traditional educational environments. And though Zeke had some of the more acutely apparent needs of Charlie's students, he had no official record to speak of, much less an IEP. Charlie had guessed that he'd been homeschooled before coming to Strive, but also didn't want to be too sure of that guess because Charlie didn't want to reinforce his own negative biases about homeschooling. Zeke wasn't trying to blackmail Charlie. This was his secret, too. Now they both knew something about one another they weren't supposed to know, something nobody ideally was supposed to know. It would have been almost touching, almost a moment of unlikely trust and mentorship amid the demoralizing warehousing realities of school, if it weren't also a massive threat to Charlie's job. If Zeke could find this, anyone could. And even if that person possessed an unusually liberated mind, there in the header, just flapping in the breeze, were all the ways in which Charlie might be found a controversial issue by parents and school administrators. Zeke, we're out of time, but we should probably talk about this more, okay? Charlie searched for the words. One must never tell someone else's child to keep anything secret from their parents or other adults generally, even if they should. Bad precedent as well as bad optics. Is it okay if we put this aside until after the vacation week? We can pick right back up where we left off. Zeke nodded, sort of. It was more of a rocking, self-soothing motion that started in his head and shimmied down his heels, but it still expressed acquiescence. Once he finally left, Charlie wrote in his classroom notes, Zeke was very focused on his lab report today, showed improvements in abstract thinking and conceptual grasp of material. Charlie met with his coworker, Keith, over lunch to plan a professional development day they were supposed to lead over April break, but Charlie kept losing the thread of the discussion. He couldn't stop thinking about who or what was maintaining backups of his old website. Keith sat opposite him with his compartmentalized lunchbox of raw ingredients. Keith only ever described the actions he performed on food as meal prep, perhaps because cooking involved a willingness to adapt and surprise oneself. Charlie stabbed mindlessly at his corner store Cobb salad, and by the second time he asked Keith to repeat something he just said, Keith's expression sank into sharp suspicion. Charlie, come on, Keith said. But somewhat to Charlie's relief, Keith was not reading Charlie's mind and judging his salacious past. He glared at the plastic fork wedged between Charlie's knuckles, hovering over a gray-tinged hard-boiled egg. We have a whole tray of metal ones. The break room was a microwave atop a mini fridge next to a water bubbler besides a conference table in full view of the administrative offices, and while there was a whole stack of loaner silverware next to the mini fridge, Charlie didn't trust his colleagues' standards of food-safe sanitation. As if intuiting this objection, Keith added, at least grab a compostable one from somewhere. Those are, cost extra, Charlie shrugged. Keith, the nosy, nagging henpecker, Charlie thought, then immediately reconsidered. Could one man call another a henpecker? Did it still count as misgendering when the man in question was cis? Or was it garden variety heterosexism? Charlie searched for a masculine equivalent to the epithet, but cockpecker sounded like something else entirely. Too fun to capture the essence of Keith's tendency to carp over Charlie's habits. I would just be worried, about what it meant, Keith concluded, or how it might look if I were in your position, running an environmental studies module while relying on single-use resources. Just speaking for myself personally, I could see how it would be misunderstood, but I could be wrong, of course. Keith always did this when he was annoyed at someone, like he could neither pick his battles nor openly commit to them. Perhaps being hassled by younger people was the cost of finally looking his age. Keith was only 23. And in his second year as an instructor, and in that short time he'd managed to overshare enough details about his relationship with his father that Charlie, more than twice his age, didn't want to escalate their dynamic into a parent-child proxy drama. He looked the part. Charlie's baby face hadn't so much filled out as it had begun to sink, one jowl at a time, in the manner of so many men experiencing the softening and swelling of middle age. Once upon a time, he'd wanted more of a chin, and here he was, with more of a neck. He should worry less about this sort of thing, even if it made 20-somethings think he was a bumbling patriarch. Keith was a brat who took his cheekbones for granted, but he was also at a vulnerable point in his career. They both were. Charlie was ascending steadily through midlife without a retirement plan. There are a number of ways to explain the situation. Serial recessions, gig economies, wage gaps, real estate bubbles, medical debt balloons, student loan sharks, familial transphobia, generational trauma, executive dysfunction, pathological demand avoidance, the death knells of late capitalist imperialism, and barely suppressed fatalism that he might not live long enough to see retirement anyway. But he had some good working years ahead of him yet, and possibly even a few good living ones. But if he were able to just stick around and strive long enough, they'd cover a small portion of his health insurance premiums. Oh, true, he finally responded after so much calculation, like it had never occurred to him. You make a good point. He forced himself to pay attention after that. He'd have to investigate Zeke's discovery later. Besides, just for the sake of professional development, of course, Charlie wanted Keith to feel cooperative. Charlie ran a close inspection of the Strive computer lab after classes let out and found nothing, which might explain a teenage vision quest leading to his old smut. He would conduct the bulk of his research at home anyway, safely veiled behind a VPN. Charlie lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a barber shop on North Street, the so-called main drag of 20th century buildings, occupied by thrift shops, bars, a hardware store, a nail salon, and a bunch of city buildings like the old wooden post office and brick fire station. As he arrived home, he made eye contact with Sis, S-I-S, the barber, while he searched his pockets for the key. Sis gave him a half smile and a nod, which he returned as she swept hair off the floor and prepared to lock up for the night. During the week, the shop typically opened after Charlie left for work and closed before he returned, so it was as good as living above an empty garage. On weekends, he woke to the smell of barbasol and the sounds of electric buzzers and men idling and arguing for hours. Most of the town police were regulars, as well as a lot of tradesmen and contractors, or at least the general milieu of impatient and squinty-eyed guys who drove pickup trucks. The more they complained, the longer they lingered. Conflict was the heart of intimacy in this shared ritual. Local gossip was rampant. Charlie could have run a weekly newspaper from his bedroom, just eavesdropping through the floorboards. This was a grizzled woman who held her own among the men because she knew more about sports than any of them, and still provided a feminine sounding board for their personal problems. Sometimes the men's wives and girlfriends got it twisted and came by to make a scene, but Sis was unflappable. She also held some beliefs that Charlie wished he didn't know about. He'd had his hair cut there once or twice because she could actually wrangle curls and texture, but never without commentary about ethnic hair. He hadn't called her out yet because she had a tendency to drop her worst opinions as her scissors grazed his ears. And Sis wasn't really the receptive type for a righteous lecture. Plus, Charlie found it difficult to justify traveling to get his hair cut somewhere else. Sis wildly undercharged for her talents. And how would one go about seeking a progressive or like less racist barber shop in small town New England? And what if he were just subconsciously holding her to higher standards as a woman in a historically male-dominated role? But all of his hesitations and self-serving evasions were just spoils of white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, Charlie thought. That's how they get you comfortable with the status quo. He'd have to find somewhere else to balance things out eventually. As a teenager, Charlie used to scare the neighborhood children he babysat by telling them about 56K dial-up internet. They couldn't believe such things ever took place over a phone line, that someone could break your connection simply by picking up the kitchen phone. The kids were sure this was another one of those urban legends which teenagers, who seem like children to adults and like adults to children, use to intimidate or dazzle those just outside their own generation. He might have said to them, flashlight to his chin around a campfire, imagine yourself lost in a dense forest where everything moves slowly and looks terrible, which is what makes it perfect. You encounter two devils in these woods, the one you know and the one you don't. Desiring to express yourself and connect with others, you and millions of people enter their most personal thoughts, feelings, and life events into databases. Everything you create is private property, and you are not its owner. And so either your information belongs to a successful company as their intellectual property forever and ever, amen, or else your information belongs to an unsuccessful company and disappears or is sold when their shady technology or culture or funding stream implodes. Choose your devil carefully. And be aware that if you die in the cloud, which is only after all someone else's computer, you die in real life. Nowadays, Charlie looks up anything of a personal nature by strictly encrypted means. The full phrases which he searched to track down the reanimated corpse of his old website were technically devoid of curses and genitals and references to illicit left-wing ideologies, but still, he hit more dead ends than he assumed he might. So whatever Zeke found had been buried deep. Thank God. At first, all he could glean was that the website probably did exist as a complete mirror of the original, hosted or managed by something called the Queer Ephemera Project, an anonymous collective of new media necromancers based out of Enfield Institute of Technology, committed to the study and preservation of orphaned digital works, applications, content-facing deletion, and other aspects of virtual LGBTQAI+ online life. Beyond that, there were few clues as to when and where the contents of this archive were accessible. Charlie used to be in favor of this kind of punk-tinged digital stewardship until he met professional archivists and came to understand why all of them planned to have their own diaries incinerated. This Queer Ephemera Project had something of his, and Zeke had stumbled into it somehow, and Charlie wanted it gone. Somehow. He had a growing hunch that the Queer Ephemera Project was more than a backup server. He might have asked Zeke when he had the chance what exactly he'd meant by comparing his experience to a vision, but the kid was stressed enough as it was, and might have withdrawn in frustration. No use lingering on regrets now, Charlie thought. But he found himself unwilling to let go of some vague guilt anyway. It was so potent that it hit him like brain freeze. And that's when his old fix, all at once, just as Zeke had said, found him. Charlie knew that if he let his personal technology collect where he went and what he did and how he spent, and he was required to some extent in order to use it all fed back into the advertisements he was made to endure to continue to use the service. His less cautious friends gave away their faces, their voices, and who knew what other biometrics. It wasn't like the 5 typical senses were the only measure of a user. The Queer Ephemera Project might have been curated by volunteers at a college for all he knew, but the archive's interactive research guide was maybe the most biometrically sensitive, highly sophisticated targeted ad campaign he'd ever seen, or else an AI model trained on the horniest corners of GeoCities in Zanga, and the metadata he and countless others didn't even know slipped through the digital cracks of their lives on a constant basis. He didn't have to ask a search engine for anything. If you were different, if you were lonely, this archive already knew what you were really looking for. Charlie's mother used to say 50% of life was just showing up. As she got older, that percentage got higher and higher, until at last, on her deathbed, it seemed to max out just shy of a unified field theory of loitering. She was actually still alive. She'd been on her self-described deathbed for the past 17 years, and she continued to leverage the solemnity of that position to proselytize. 99% of life is just showing up, she said nowadays. You'll understand when you're an old woman like me. When I'm an old woman, Charlie would repeat back to her, with as little affect as possible. Maybe someday she would hear how her own words sounded, perhaps consider their implications and impact on their listener, but it wasn't likely. Mom's perpetual hospice proved a stubborn ideological ground for her, always in death's downward pull, yet victoriously resilient year after year. She'd never been more certain of what she knew. Sometimes Charlie met her there with compassion. He considered how different her world was than his, how difficult her life had been, in ways he'd never have to experience. How many ways and chances a person could be given to get their head around certain things right in front of them, such as having a son and not a daughter, and still commit to denial. Either way, Charlie had been brushing off her advice since the percentage was a mere modest half. He realized that he'd accepted it after all. When he finally got out of his car outside the Student Center at Enfield Institute of Technology, somewhere on this campus, amid its sparse, confusing signage within a glass cube named after a war criminal, behind a space-age facade panel were the archive and its overseers, those responsible for exposing Charlie's private history to the wider world. The plan was not to visit, but specifically to trespass, locate, and demand direct access to the Queer Ephemera Project. Face-to-face interaction was the only meaningful way to exercise your agency, the only effective way to enact self-advocacy. Actual presence was like complex positive representation for real life. I just dropped my water. Give me a second. It's bubble water. As Charlie paced the riot-proof innards of the campus buildings, all connected underground by walking tunnels, he tried to maintain a brisk gait, as if he were headed to a known destination. Suppose he found what he was looking for. He began to rehearse what he might say to the person or persons responsible. Would it be a mousy undergraduate clinging to their heightened personal attachment to random men's vintage internet projects? A faculty member who needed the material for a book? Maybe some kind of support staff who could only show him to the same dead ends they face daily. He realized that he had assumed he would confront some white, yaoi-fed, media-poisoned young adult, likely a semi-out FTM, as in someone who would yell at him for using dated and problematic terms like FTM, as in someone who didn't know that FTM had been reclaimed, actually, back when they were still in diapers, and also it stood for Fujoshi to manic depressive, someone who stood in surrogate for a self that he had outgrown and disavowed, and therefore someone he could disavow. But maybe that was all the more reason to give this part of himself away. Was there a horseshoe theory of self-preservation that came all the way back around to secondhand embarrassment? What if this person was more marginalized than him? Charlie scanned each building's directory as he passed through sections and cross-sections of tunnels beneath half-ground and basement levels. As he gave into his doubts and misgivings, he felt something like magnetism take hold of his body with each unanswerable question. The more psyched out and spaced out he became, the stronger the sensation grew, resolving the uncertainty of forks and bends in the tunnels, leading him to the maintenance and receiving dock of Brain, Nerve, and Cognitive Sciences building. This one had restricted levels above the lecture hall and admin offices, as well as a second bay of elevators and stairs, which led to 5 tiers of sub-basement. Access to sterile dry labs only, no live specimens allowed. Ah, Charlie thought. So it must be those restricted upper floors where they poked monkeys in the eye. Below the sign, a cryptic letterboard listed QEP and something abbreviated to CECC as the occupants of sub-basement 3. What else could QEP be? His entire body had that pins and needles buzz, the warm part before it gets painful, but after you've lost noticeable control of your appendages. Charlie was used to this feeling. A side sleeper, he always passed out on his left arm and woke up with a floppy phantom limb. He stepped into the elevator and barely had to graze the SB3 button to activate it. No ID card needed for this one. Sub-basement 3 was a long, bright corridor with friendly, textured entryway to the reception area for the Center for Experimental Collective Consciousness. And opposite, a heavy but otherwise nondescript utility door labeled with a simple hand-drawn sign. From a distance, Charlie thought the sign said, "Oops!" But as he got closer, it was clear that it did read QEP. Someone had colored in the void of the Q with whiteboard markers and oversaturated rainbow stripes. Each line of ink bled into its neighbors and the boundaries of the letter, blotting out the tail of the Q. There was no keypad, no ID card reader, not even a mechanical lock that the lowliest custodial closets tend to have on their door handles. The handle looked so clean, so inviting to grab and twist, like sliding a new bar of soap out of its packaging. Before grasping the doorknob, he rehearsed how he might explain the gist of this visit to campus security, who he was certain would appear at any moment. They would demand his ID. He'd be unable to produce it. But he meant no harm. You know, he meant to trespass, but not harm. Yes, he'd only come to protect something vulnerable. And there need not be a guilty party. Inside the room was a single overhead pendant light casting a circle of visibility on the checkerboard linoleum floor and barnwood paneled walls. It wasn't clear how large the room was or how far back it went. The air was pleasantly mild and fresh, like a perfect spring day. There was no technology whatsoever which Charlie could observe, at least not in the conventional sense. He'd expected something slick and menacing. Repeating racks of black metal, ribbons of Cat5 cable, the blink of status lights on display panels, the idle hum of drives and fans, that placental noise, the static of activity without life. He didn't encounter any ambitious faculty members or overeager undergraduates or overworked graduate students either. There was only a life-size avatar of a perfect young man, sitting in one of those black rehearsal chairs every theater program keeps knocking around. The avatar's face seemed uncannily familiar, and then Charlie recognized its appearance as approximately Keith from work, crossed with a generic type from which heartthrobs of his youth like Jonathan Taylor Thomas and Leonardo DiCaprio emerged. He smelled. The avatar smelled like 2000 shopping mall Abercrombie and Fitch. Uncanny Keith shook his shaggy curtains of perfect hair and locked his empty holographic gaze with Charlie's red, aging eyes. And God, he really felt like he was aging for the first time, and held out a pair of scissors. The avatar didn't speak, but it didn't need to. It tilted its milky neck to the side as Charlie took the scissors from it. They seemed real and solid enough. They were the safety kind with plastic handles that Charlie kept in his classroom, not the precision tool of a barber. Uncanny Keith had massive, muscular shoulders which prevented it from reaching the back of its own head, where the hair itched and chafed along its annoyingly upright spine. It was at once helpless, powerful, wild, and needing to be tamed by his touch. Charlie understood now what those countless desperate Fic patrons had come to him for, what reduced Zeke to salivary fits, and what the archive itself deduced about his own needs after everything he'd given to it, knowingly or not. He took a silkily rendered lock of the avatar's hair between his fingers and began to cut away. The end. I still don't know what the fuck that story's about, so don't even.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I know it was a little on the long end.
It actually was just a smidge, but it was really perfect. Not a big deal. Not to worry at all. Thank you so much. It was lovely work. Really. And Alexander Danner as well. Both of you I've been away for a month or so with COVID, and this is my first evening back. And I want to thank you both for welcoming me back with a really wonderful program, really outstanding work from you both. Thank you for joining us at Story Hour. And thank you all out there for continuing to come back. Really sorry for the spam. Laura and I tried really hard to have that not happen. And it's pretty rare. Every time it does, we learn a little bit to prevent it next time. And fortunately, it didn't really disrupt the reading, but it still sucks. So we to try and keep a spam-free environment. So again, Julian K. Jarboe, Alexander Danner, lovely work.
Thank you. This was great fun.
Thank you again, Alexander, for thinking of me.
Oh, of course. It's been way too long since I've seen you.
Yeah, it's been way too long since I've seen anyone. I live in a cave.
Yeah, that's
Actually.
familiar. Well, all right, folks. Next week we have Alice Gauntly, Maria Haskins, and Laura and I, and hopefully all of you. I also want to thank Laura for just being a wonderful partner in crime and co-host, and for supporting my absence during the last few weeks. So,
we're just glad to have you back, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel and Laura.
Night, everybody. See you next time.
Thank you for coming.
Good night.
Read for us again. Bye-bye.